Still living like a broke grandpa? My son-in-law Trevor said that at Sunday dinner, right in front of my daughter and grandkids. Everyone laughed, except me. You know that moment when you realize someone just crossed a line they shouldn't have? When a humiliated father-in-law finally decides it's time to show who really keeps the household running? Well, what I did the next morning changed his life forever. I'm going to tell you everything, but before that, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. And let me know where you're listening from. I'd really love to know how far this story is reaching. My name is Walter Hensley. I'm 72 years old, and I worked on the railroad in Liberty, Missouri for 45 years. I've always been proud of my job, keeping the tracks safe, making sure people got home. It wasn't glamorous, but it was essential, and it gave me purpose every single day. I worked with dignity and built a simple retirement, solid as the tracks I helped maintain. I was never rich, but I never let anyone down when they needed me. You know when you build a life based on principles and think that counts for something? My wife Helen loved watching the trains pass by our porch, especially in the late afternoon when the sun turned the rail cars gold. She died 17 years ago from a cancer that only took 6 months to show us who was really in charge. Since then, I've kept the house exactly the way she liked it. Curtains always clean, plants watered, floors waxed every Friday. I make a promise every day as I look at her picture on the living room shelf. Claire will never struggle, Helen. I'll take care of our girl the way you took care of both of us. That promise became more important than my own life, but maybe it was my biggest mistake. I'm not a complicated man. I have discipline and values I learned from my father, who was also a railroad man. I grew up in a time when your word was worth more than any signed contract, when a handshake still meant something. Men from my generation don't talk much about feelings, but when we make a promise, we keep it to the very end. I built a life on honesty, without shortcuts or tricks like I saw other men pull. And I've always put family first, above everything else. But have you ever wondered if generosity can be mistaken for weakness? People here in Liberty respect me because they know my story. 45 years without missing a single day of work. When I walk down the street, I hear, "Mr. Hensley, how have you been?" from people who saw me grow up in this small town. I built a solid reputation on hard work and keeping my word, something that used to mean a lot. I'm known as a man with a generous heart, always willing to help those in need. That's always been my trademark in the community. But some people take kindness in a very different way than they should. Claire is my only daughter, my rare gem after Helen passed. She's always been special, full of dreams about having a beautiful family and a comfortable life. When she married Trevor 15 years ago, he seemed like a good guy, polite, ambitious, with plans to grow in his law career. My grandkids, Luke and Grace, brought a fresh joy to my home, filling the quiet corners with the sound of children's laughter. Family is all a man truly has at the end of the day, right? At least that's what I thought, until I found out some people see family in a very different way. First, there was the comment about my sedan when I showed up at their place for Grace's birthday lunch. "Dad, does that car still run? The neighbors must think you're the groundskeeper," Trevor said as he stepped out of his BMW, laughing like it was the wittiest joke in the world. Claire gave an awkward smile but didn't say a word to defend me. I just shook my head, figuring it was a tasteless joke. My 2015 Honda has always served me well. It's reliable, economical, and paid off. To me, that's what matters. Then came the request disguised as a favor during their Labor Day barbecue. "Just this month, Walter." "Luke's school payment was higher than we expected," Trevor said while flipping steaks on the grill I'd given him for Christmas. Claire kept fiddling with her phone, avoiding eye contact with me the whole time. I've never said no to my daughter, and they knew that. I transferred the $2,400 the same day, without asking when I'd see it back. Helping family just felt natural, right? Next was the remark about my house while we were watching the Chiefs game on TV. "Walter, you've got so much extra space. Have you thought about renting out a room? Could be some extra income," Trevor suggested while sipping an imported beer. Luke looked at me curiously. Grace was drawing in the corner. I explained that my home is my sanctuary, where I still feel Helen close. He just shrugged, like he couldn't understand being emotionally attached to any place. Some people see everything as square footage and business potential. The fourth was more subtle, but it got under my skin in a different way. During an ordinary dinner, Trevor made a comment about my clothes. "Walter, that vintage style is getting popular with the younger crowd," he said, pointing at my plaid shirt I've worn for years. Claire laughed that polite laugh a woman gives when she wants to please her husband. Luke dropped his eyes to his plate. Grace kept eating quietly. I didn't say a word, just kept chewing slowly. An ungrateful son-in-law always thinks he has the right to comment on everything, even the way you dress. But the one that really stuck with me happened at last Sunday's dinner. Trevor had just been promoted to partner at the law firm in Kansas City. He was over the moon talking about his raise and plans to expand the house. Grace had made a beautiful drawing to celebrate. Luke was excitedly talking about a new video game. Claire was pouring the imported wine I had brought, smiling with pride. It felt like a normal family moment, until Trevor opened his mouth again. Have you ever had that feeling that something is about to change forever? It happened at the dinner celebrating his promotion, at a table set with more care than usual. Trevor was now a partner at the firm and even had printed invitations for the dinner, as if it were a corporate event. The table had a brand new tablecloth, imported wine whose price he made sure to mention, and the kids were on the living room sofa with tablets so they wouldn't interrupt the adults' celebration. Claire had chosen to wear the dress I'd paid for on my card last month. The whole house radiated financial success, but I knew exactly where every cent had come from. I was proud of his achievement, genuinely happy to see my daughter smiling. Trevor was especially animated that night, talking about the important clients he'd now be responsible for. He gestured with his wine glass in hand, telling office stories with that lawyerly eloquence that always impressed Claire. "Now that I'm a partner, I can finally give my family the very best," he declared, looking affectionately at his wife. Luke and Grace had come over to congratulate their dad before going back to their tablets. The atmosphere was festive, family-like, exactly the way I had always dreamed our dinners would be. For a moment, I thought maybe all those little tensions in the past had just been misunderstandings. When dessert came, Trevor took a generous sip of wine and looked straight at me. "Walter, retirement must be pretty comfortable. Must be nice to get used to not having any real responsibilities, huh?" He said it with a smile, as if it were just casual family talk. Claire stopped cutting the cake but didn't say a word to defend me. Luke looked at me with that childlike curiosity that can sense tension in the air. Grace lowered her eyes to her plate, stirring her melting ice cream. I chewed slowly, tasting the bitter edge of his words mixed with the sweetness of dessert. The silence lasted only a few seconds, but they felt eternal before he went on. Trevor leaned back in his chair with the posture of someone who had just won a major case in court. He looked around the table, making sure he had everyone's attention in that moment. Claire finally raised her eyes, but instead of looking at me, she locked them on her husband with an expression I had never seen before. It was admiration mixed with something that froze me inside. The grandkids stayed silent, sensing something important was happening at that family table. That's when he dropped the bomb that blew everything apart. "Still living like a broke grandpa?" Trevor said, laughing out loud as if it were the most natural and clever thing in the entire world. The phrase echoed through the dining room like a cannon shot. Claire laughed along, a laugh that pierced something deep in my chest and showed me a version of her I'd never known. Luke's eyes went wide, glancing between me and his father like he was watching a drama unfold. Grace simply stopped stirring her spoon and looked at me with those knowing eyes children sometimes have, the ones that see more than they should. The sound of their laughter filled the room, but for me, it was as if the world had gone silent. I kept eating my dessert quietly, swallowing that humiliation along with the chocolate cake that had suddenly lost all flavor. On the outside, I kept the calm expression Helen had taught me to wear during life's hardest moments. Trevor kept laughing, pleased with his own cruel joke. Claire smiled at him as if she'd just witnessed the most charming moment of the night. The kids watched us in absolute silence, aware that something irreversible had just happened at that table. Inside, I felt something break for good. It wasn't anger, and it wasn't ordinary sadness. It was a cold, crystal-clear understanding of who these people truly were deep down. Luke lowered his eyes to his plate. Grace pushed her dessert away without saying a word. They knew their grandfather had just been publicly humiliated at his own family's table. Kids always know when adults cross lines that should never be crossed. I finished my dessert, thanked them for dinner, and drove home slowly through the quiet city. That's when everything changed. I got home that night and went straight to my office in the basement, a little corner Helen had always respected as my personal space. I switched on the faintly buzzing fluorescent light and took my first deep breath since dinner. The air down there was cooler, far from the heat of humiliation still burning in my chest. My wooden desk was as organized as always, with the old calculator sitting next to the pen holder. It was time to do something I hadn't done in 15 years. You know that moment when you finally decide to face the reality that's been right in front of you all along? I opened the metal drawer where I've kept all the family's important documents for decades. Inside were folders neatly labeled in my own handwriting: school, mortgage, BMW, health plans. Each folder represented years of financial help I had given without question, without asking for anything in return. I pulled them all out and spread them across the desk, creating a mosaic of my generosity. Helen always said I was too generous, but I thought I was just being a good father. Now, looking at this mountain of papers, I realized she might have been right all along. I picked up the calculator and started with the big expenses, the $3,000 monthly mortgage over 12 years. I punched in the numbers slowly, feeling the weight of each digit. The result hit me hard: $432,000 just for the house. Then came the BMW, the kids' private schools, the health plans, the constant emergencies. Each category revealed thousands upon thousands of dollars drained from my modest retirement. I added it all up, double-checking each figure. When the final number flashed on the display, I had to drop into my chair with force. Nearly $1 million in 15 years. $976,200. That's what it cost to be a generous father-in-law to an ungrateful family. I stared at that number for long minutes, trying to process what it really meant. It was practically my entire retirement. 45 years of hard work on the rails turned into a lifeline for people who humiliated me in public. The worst part wasn't the money itself, but the way they treated every cent as if it were their right. There was never a sincere thank you, only the assumption that I could and should always pay for everything. That realization hurt more than any cruel joke. I closed the folders and put the receipts back into the metal drawer. The number crunching part was over. Now I had to decide what to do with this information. I grabbed a blank sheet of paper and wrote at the top, "Plan." Underneath, I listed every service I was paying for: bank, dealership, Luke's school, Grace's school, health plan. 5 items that upheld their lifestyle. That's what a silent revenge from an old man looked like on paper. A simple, straightforward list. Helen always said the best decisions are made with calm and determination, never with anger. I spent the next few hours planning every detail: which numbers to call, which documents I'd need on hand, how to approach each person. I wrote mental scripts for every conversation, anticipating the questions they'd ask. I organized all the proof showing my financial responsibility for each account. It was meticulous planning, just like Helen used to do when organizing our vacation trips. Every step calculated, every consequence anticipated. The only difference was that this time I was planning the end of my generosity, not the start of a family adventure. I went upstairs to the kitchen and made myself some tea, something I hadn't done in a long time. I sat at the table where Helen and I used to plan the family's future. The house was quiet, but it was a thoughtful kind of silence. For the first time in years, I was thinking about my own financial well-being. I drank the tea slowly, savoring not just the warmth of the liquid, but also the feeling of taking control of the situation. It felt strange to have this mental clarity after so many years living on the autopilot of generosity. But it was a good feeling, freeing in a way I didn't expect. I went back to the office and refined my plan. I decided to wait a few days before acting to make sure I wasn't making an impulsive decision. Everything would be done during business hours, all with politeness and determination. I wrote a detailed schedule on a separate sheet, like it was a railroad engineering project. Each cancellation would have its exact time, its proper moment. There would be no rush, no mistakes. It was comforting to have a solid plan after so many years of only reacting to other people's financial emergencies. The next few days passed with a strange calm, as if I had finally found the right track after years of being lost. I'd have my breakfast looking out the kitchen window, watching the neighbors head off to their daily routines. They had no idea I was about to completely change my life. It was comforting to know that some secrets are ours until we choose to share them. And this secret I would keep until Trevor and Claire found out for themselves. The anticipation was almost as satisfying as the action that was about to come. When the moment came to act, I called the bank. "Good morning. I'd like to cancel the automatic debit from Walter Hensley's account for mortgage number 447831. The rep was polite and processed the cancellation in just a few minutes. It was surprisingly simple to undo a financial dependency I had created myself. Next, BMW dealership. I need to remove my name as co-signer and suspend the automatic payments. Then, schools and health plan. Each call took less than 10 minutes, but each one marked the end of an era. The era of Walter, the silent and invisible provider. A few days later, the phone rang early in the morning. It was Trevor. His tone was different. "Walter, something strange happened. The bank said you canceled the mortgage's automatic debit. Must have been some kind of system error, right?" I let him talk for a full minute, asking confused questions about technical issues that didn't exist. Claire was crying in the background. I could hear her clearly. When he finally went silent, waiting for my answer, I said only 3 words that changed everything between us. It wasn't a mistake. I hung up the phone and went back to my breakfast. It was the first time in 15 years that I'd had the final word in a conversation with Trevor. The sun was streaming through the kitchen window, lighting the table where Helen and I used to dream about the future of our family. Now I was building a different future, one based on mutual respect instead of exploitation disguised as love. It was the start of a new chapter, and for the first time in a long while I was looking forward to seeing how it would unfold. 2 days after the phone call, Trevor and Claire showed up at my door unannounced. It was mid-afternoon, and I was watering Helen's plants on the porch when I saw the BMW pull up in front of the house. Trevor got out first, with that tense posture of a lawyer gearing up for a tough negotiation. Claire stepped out slowly, her eyes red from crying. They walked up the sidewalk like people about to face a stern judge. I opened the door before they could ring the bell, just like I had for 15 years. But this time, I didn't invite them in right away. "We need to talk, Walter," Trevor said, trying to recover some authority in his voice. I let them in and we sat in the living room, not the family kitchen where we'd always worked through problems. It was a more formal, more distant setting. Claire settled into Helen's favorite armchair. Trevor sat on the couch, staring straight at me. "Walter, I know that joke was out of line," he began, using the same tone he'd use in court. "But canceling all those payments like that without talking to us, it's affecting the kids too." I listened in silence, noting how he was still trying to make me feel guilty. A humiliated father-in-law learns to recognize emotional manipulation after it repeats so many times. "Show them," I said, pointing to the coffee table. I had prepared a folder with every receipt, organized chronologically. Trevor opened it hesitantly, and Claire leaned over to look. Receipt after receipt, transfer after transfer, proof after proof. 15 years of generosity documented in perfect order. Mortgage, BMW, private schools, health plan. I narrated as they flipped through the folder. With each category I named, Trevor's expression shifted a little more. Claire began to cry softly. "Did you know I've spent almost $1 million from my retirement to support your lifestyle?" My voice was calm, but firm. "And did you know that in 15 years I've never received a sincere thank you?" Trevor tried to interrupt, but I raised my hand. "Let me finish. I'm a 72-year-old man who worked 45 years on the rails to build a simple life. I don't need to hear jokes about being a broke grandpa from the people I'm supporting." The silence in the room was as heavy as lead. Claire wiped her tears with a tissue. Trevor finally found words. "Walter, I didn't realize it was that much. Claire always said you liked to help." He looked at his wife as if expecting confirmation. She just shook her head, unable to speak. "Liking to help is one thing," I replied. "Being treated like an invisible sponsor is something else entirely. You built an entire life on top of my retirement and still thought it was funny to humiliate me in front of my grandkids." The reality was finally sinking in for them. But was it too late? "What do you want from us, Dad?" Claire asked, her voice breaking. It was the first time she'd called me Dad in years. It had always just been Walter. Her question revealed how our relationship had become purely transactional. "I want respect," I said without hesitation. "I want to be treated like the man who supported you for 15 years, not like some embarrassing relative you tolerate in exchange for financial help." Trevor shuffled the papers nervously. "And how do we do that now?" he asked, genuinely lost without his arrogant lawyer tone. I stood up from the armchair and walked to the window where Helen used to stand on Sunday afternoons. "First, you're going to take over your own bills. All of them. No exceptions." I turned to face them. "Second, if you want me to keep helping with something, you ask. Politely, with humility, and by explaining the situation." Trevor swallowed hard. "Third, never again make jokes at my expense, especially in front of the kids. They deserve to have a respected grandfather, not a humiliated one." The conditions were on the table. It was a family confrontation I should have initiated years ago. "And what if we can't pay for everything?" Claire asked, looking at the receipts spread out. "Then you're going to learn to live within your means, just like I did when I started working on the railroad at 25. My answer was direct, without unnecessary cruelty. "You'll sell the BMW and get a used car. You'll take the kids out of private school if you have to and put them in public school. You'll cut the extras, make a family budget, live like normal people do." It was a reality check they had needed for a very long time. Trevor ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized as desperation in disguise. "Walter, I know I messed up. The joke was stupid, cruel. But do you understand this is going to change our lives completely?" He was right, and I knew it. "Your life is going to change to real life, Trevor. The life you could afford without my help." Claire was still crying, but now I could tell it wasn't just sadness. It was fear. Fear of finding out if they could survive financially without my automatic support. It was a question they had never asked themselves. "Dad," Claire said again, "can we talk about the kids' schools? They're not to blame for any of this." It was the first sensible argument I'd heard since they arrived. The kids were never to blame for anything, I agreed. But do you think it's fair for them to grow up watching their grandfather get humiliated just to keep a lifestyle their parents can't afford? Silence again. "If you ask me for help with their education, with respect, I might consider it. But it will be my decision, not an automatic obligation." It was an opening, but with clear conditions. Trevor gathered all the papers and put them back in the folder. "I need time to process all this," he said, finally admitting he was lost. Claire stood up and gave me a hug, something that hadn't happened in years. "I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't realize how bad things had gotten." It was a sincere apology, but I knew words were easy. "You have time to prove you've changed," I replied. "But remember, respect is earned through actions, not promises." They left the house in silence, carrying a reality they had never faced before. I closed the door and went back to the living room, where the receipts were still scattered across the coffee table. For the first time in 15 years, I had put my dignity above a false sense of family peace. It was the beginning of a new phase in our relationship, one built on mutual respect instead of financial exploitation disguised as love. I put all the papers back in the folder, knowing that in the coming weeks I would find out whether their apologies were genuine or just desperation. Some changes take time to settle in, and I was prepared to wait as long as necessary. The first weeks brought subtle changes that only someone who knows the family well would notice. Claire started shopping during sale hours, and Trevor began having lunch at home instead of at expensive restaurants. I saw my daughter at the grocery store comparing prices on basic items, something she had never done in 15 years. The BMW was still in the driveway, but I noticed Trevor avoided taking it out on weekends. It was as if they were testing how long they could keep up appearances without my automatic support. The consequences of ingratitude were starting to show in a gradual but steady way. A month later, the first physical loss happened. The BMW disappeared from their driveway. I drove past on my way to the pharmacy and saw only the oil stains on the concrete where the car used to sit. There was no one around to offer explanations, so there was no direct awkwardness. It was the first visible sign that their lifestyle was adjusting to their real financial situation. I continued on my way, knowing other changes would naturally follow. The call from the school confirmed what I expected. Luke's tuition was overdue, and the secretary wanted to know if I would remain as the financial guarantor. "No," I replied calmly. "The parents should handle that directly with you." The woman explained that without payment, the child would be transferred to public school. "I completely understand," I said before hanging up. It was the natural course of events when people take on their own financial responsibilities. My grandson would adapt well to the new school. Of that, I was certain. Claire got a job at a store in the mall, something she had always said she'd never need to do. I saw her leaving the house in the morning wearing a uniform, walking to the bus stop with a determined posture. Trevor started taking on smaller cases he used to consider beneath his level. It was impressive to see how real necessity can quickly awaken a sense of responsibility. A family in crisis discovering that honest work doesn't diminish anyone, it only reveals character. They were learning valuable lessons that 15 years of financial ease had never taught them. The changes accelerated over the following months. Luke was transferred to public school, and to my surprise, seemed happier. Grace also adapted well to the new environment, making new friends and discovering free activities in the community. Claire increased her work hours and started talking about possible promotions. Trevor began working weekends without complaint, even showing pride in the smaller cases he managed to handle. It was a genuine transformation, not forced or resentful. They were discovering the satisfaction of earning things through their own effort. The first public expression of gratitude caught me off guard. Claire wrote a letter to the local newspaper's Community Thanks section. "I'd like to publicly thank my father, Walter Hensley, for the 15 years of silent generosity that allowed our family to live with dignity. Only now do we truly understand the value of his unconditional love." The letter was published on a Thursday, and several neighbors mentioned it to me throughout the week. It was an awkward kind of good, the public recognition I had never sought, but that arrived at exactly the right time. The following Sunday, Trevor made his own statement at church. During the testimony time, he stood up and asked to speak. "I want to publicly apologize to my father-in-law, Walter Hensley, who is here today. For 15 years, he supported our family with generosity, and I failed to show him the gratitude he deserved." The entire congregation turned to look at me, and I felt my face grow warm. Walter is the kind of father and man I hope to become someday. People applauded softly, and Pastor Johnson shook my hand after the service. What impressed me most was seeing how the kids reacted to the changes. Instead of complaining about losing privileges, they seemed closer to their parents. Luke helped Trevor organize paperwork on weekends, and Grace went shopping with Claire, learning about budgeting. "Grandpa, I know how to count change now," she told me proudly during a visit. It was a family learning to function as a team, sharing responsibilities instead of just enjoying benefits. Hardship was building real unity among them. After 4 months of watching these changes, I began to see that their effort was sincere. There was no unnecessary drama, no attempts at emotional manipulation. Claire worked with dignity, Trevor took on cases with humility, and the kids adapted without trauma. It was a genuinely different family from the one I had known for years. Their true character was revealing itself through the difficulties. Helen always said adversity shows who people really are, and I was watching that happen in real life. The most touching moment came when Grace got sick and needed expensive medication. Instead of calling me in a panic, the way they would have before, Trevor and Claire worked together to cover the cost. I saw Claire taking extra shifts at work, Trevor accepting a weekend case he hadn't wanted. They handled it on their own. No drama, no calls for rescue. When I heard about it from Grace herself, I felt genuine pride. For the first time in 15 years, they had faced a financial emergency without automatically reaching into my pocket. The new family dynamic settled naturally over the following months. Visits became more spontaneous, conversations more genuine. Trevor and Claire came over for Sunday coffee, now as independent adults, not financial dependents. The kids stayed close, maybe even closer than before because our relationship was built on real affection, not monetary obligations. It was strange and comforting at the same time to realize that our family had grown stronger through the financial separation I had imposed. Sitting on the porch one ordinary afternoon, Looking out at the street where Helen and I had lived for so many decades, I thought about the past months. The decision to cut off automatic support had been painful, but necessary. Trevor had discovered humility, Claire had found her inner strength, and the kids were learning real values. And I had regained my dignity without losing my family. It was the outcome Helen would have approved of. Relationships built on mutual respect, not financial dependency. Sometimes, the best changes come from the hardest decisions. 6 months after the changes, I began to realize that my relationship with Trevor and Claire had reached a completely new balance. They came to visit me regularly, but now as independent adults who chose to be there, not as dependents seeking financial rescue. Conversations flowed naturally about work, future plans, and small day-to-day achievements. Trevor spoke with pride about the cases he managed to resolve on his own, and Claire talked about the promotion she was pursuing at the store. It was comforting to see that they had discovered self-esteem through their own effort, and that our family had become closer through the financial separation I had enforced. The first time I decided to help again came when Luke mentioned he wanted to join the school baseball team. Instead of Trevor asking me directly as he would have before, he explained to his son that maybe next year they could save up the money. I decided to offer a one-time gift, but this time it was different. "Trevor, I'd like to pay for Luke's equipment as a gift from his grandpa." His reaction surprised me. Hesitation, genuine gratitude, and questions about whether I was sure. Claire called me crying, but these were tears of recognition, not financial relief. This was how it should have always been between families that truly respect one another. The most notable change came during Thanksgiving. Trevor insisted on organizing and paying for the entire dinner. "Walter, this year the dinner is on us. It's the least we can do to repay everything you've done for us." Claire prepared Helen's favorite dishes, and the kids helped with handmade decorations. During dinner, Trevor made a toast. "We want to thank Walter, who taught us that true love sometimes needs limits to flourish." It was the recognition I had never sought, but that came naturally through their growth and maturity. In the months that followed, we established a comfortable routine where I helped occasionally with the kids' activities, always when asked and with clear timelines. Trevor and Claire gradually took on every responsibility, showing steady progress. Visits became more frequent and spontaneous, rooted in genuine affection. The community noticed the change too. Pastor Johnson praised our family's transformation, and neighbors admired Trevor and Claire's dedication. It was rewarding to see them earn self-respect and the admiration of others through their own merit. The dependency I had maintained for years had only kept them from shining with their own light. One quiet evening, sitting on the porch and looking at the stars Helen and I used to admire together, I reflected on the journey of the past months. I had lost a family of financial dependence and gained a family of mature, grateful people. Trevor had become a dignified man. Claire had found her inner strength and the kids were learning real values. And I had discovered that being respected is far more rewarding than being used. Our family had found the balance between independence and connection, between love and respect. It was exactly how Helen would have wanted things to be from the start. And now to you who followed my journey. Have you ever felt undervalued by people you've always helped? Share in the comments if you've ever had to set tough boundaries with family members who confused kindness with weakness. Sometimes people only recognize the value of something when they lose it. And if my story resonated with you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Every day I share real stories of people who found the courage to stand up for themselves when they were disrespected by those they loved most. It's never too late to teach people how you deserve to be treated, even when those people are your own family.